Welcome to Humble Beginnings, the Undrafted podcast. I'm your host, Rochelle Hamilton Jr. This is episode 34 of the podcast, and we got a good one for you today. But first, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. Christmas is coming up early next week, next Tuesday to be exact. So I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, and I hope you and your family have a very blessed and highly favored holiday season. And you know, the thing about Christmas is, man, you know, Christmas is such a wonderful time of the year, but the thing that really kind of takes it out of me for Christmas is just how materialized and commercialized that it has become over time. And I really wish we could get back to focusing on what is the real reason for the season, which in which our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was brought onto this earth to do what he did, which is give all of us access to, you know, salvation. So, you know, happy birthday to Jesus, or happy cake day to Jesus, as I like to say, and a very Merry Christmas to you and your family. Well, we got a good one for you today. In today's episode of the Undrafted podcast, I want to talk about the Broncos and the Browns. I have my reaction to that game last Saturday night. Man, the Broncos, man, they find a way to break my heart some way, somehow. But you know what? I still love my squad. And I'm in, I'm out. I'm going to talk about, you know, I almost said the San Diego Chargers. Are the Los Angeles Chargers the team to beat in the National Football League? And you know what? They just might be. And what's the wave with Chef Rodaddy? I'm going to talk about the Trump administration. They made a ruling that lowers nutrition standards in school lunches across the country. And to be honest with you, this is a problem, and I'll explain why in that segment. And in my favorite segment, this is some bull jive. Well, the Pro Bowl roster was announced, and there was a few names that were on the snub list that really kind of took me by surprise. Well, without further ado, let's get into the low with Ro. The Denver Broncos dropped another game Saturday night as they took the L against the Cleveland Browns in Denver. Now, the Browns beat the Broncos 17-16 in what marked their first win against Denver since 1990. The last time the Browns beat the Broncos, Bernie Kosar was the quarterback for Cleveland, and of course, the Duke John Elway was the field general for the Broncos. Matter of fact, in 1990, I was like 5, so that's insane. Well, having said that, man, you know what? First off, let me get to the positive marks about this team and in this game. You know, and I'll start off with number 30, Phillip Lindsay. Phillip Lindsay is my dog. Like, I've been saying all season long that this dude was going to be special, and Phillip Lindsay has proven me right. And he's also done the right thing by picking the number 30, which, of course, was made famous by the one and only Terrell Davis. Phillip Lindsay is going to the Pro Bowl. He's the first offensive undrafted rookie free agent in NFL history to be selected to the Pro Bowl in his rookie year. Phillip Lindsay's got 991 yards on the season, and he should be able to break the 1,000-yard milestone Monday night against the Raiders in Oakland. Von Miller, he was selected to his 7th Pro Bowl. Von Miller's had a great year as well. Now, he had 1 sack Saturday, and with that sack, he passed up Simon Fletcher for the franchise record in sacks, and he's only in his 8th year. Simon Fletcher, he finished his Broncos career with 97.5 sacks. Von has 98 individual sacks. Now for the nitty-gritty. This game on Saturday, man, I tell you what. So with 2 more games to go, the Broncos, they're on the verge of making the wrong kind of history. They're at risk of having back-to-back losing seasons for the first time since 1972. Now, that's something that hasn't been done since Pat Bowlen bought the team in 1984. Now, it's a safe bet that Vance Joseph, he's gone after the Chargers game in Week 17. And after that bombshell report by Woody Page that dropped this past Monday, Vance Joseph is 100% gone. And the rumor mill is heating up, and where there's smoke, there's fire. We all know how that goes. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of that article, but I do recommend that you read it. But basically, John Elway had a plan to bring Mike Shanahan back to the Broncos, and Kirk Cousins would have come with him at a discounted price. But Joe Ellis, who's the president and the CEO of the Broncos, he nixed the entire deal because of some bad blood between him and Mike Shanahan that, you know, spanned some years back. Now, with Mike Shanahan, now, when I first heard this, I was like, dude, why would the Broncos go back to Mike Shanahan? There's no reason to go. Now, Mike Shanahan, he's the best coach in Broncos history. You know, he got on their first 2 Super Bowls. We get all that. But I was sitting here thinking, like, why would you go back to Mike Shanahan when, he hasn't coached in the last few years? And then the more I thought about it, it actually made quite a bit of sense, because when you look at a lot of the things that the NFL is doing now offensively, Mike Shanahan brought that to the Broncos back in the 90s when he came. He came in 1995, and a lot of the things that you see that are prevalent in the NFL as far as offenses go nowadays, with teams doing all these play actions and these boots and misdirections and zone reads and all that. Mike Shanahan was doing that with the Broncos in 1995. That's why he was called the mastermind, because he brought an offense to the league that a lot of people hadn't seen. And that's really why Denver was able to churn out all those 1,000-yard running backs, and they were able to pound teams into the ground because they were able to physically wear teams down, and then they were also able to hurt you in the passing game with Rod Smith and John Elway and Shannon Sharp and Ed McCaffrey and those cats. So, Mike Shanahan, in a lot of ways, he was a man before his time when it came to his coaching style. Now, it kind of ran its course, during his last few years in Denver. But Mike Shanahan, with the way the offenses are going and the way the rules are tailored towards the offense in the NFL today, Mike Shanahan could come back and he could kill it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But like I said, if you want to get into the specifics, I highly suggest reading that article, because it's got some ins and outs of things that have went on inside Dove Valley up there in Denver that you won't get anywhere else. And with the way that article is written, you can tell there's somebody in the organization that's credible that's giving them this information. But anyway, back to Saturday's game. This game was one of the most frustrating games that I've seen by the Broncos in a long time. Coming off the embarrassment last week in San Fran, I was thinking Denver would come out and they would have some pop. They would have a little bit of jazz to them. But, now the Broncos, they've been gashed by injuries, especially on defense in the secondary. So I figured in that area of the team, they would struggle. This game was a low-scoring game that it kind of went back and forth for the most part. Now, the part of the game that was the most frustrating was that 13-play drive Denver put together at the end of the fourth quarter. Now, the way this drive ended had me hot as fish grease, because this is where Denver lost the game. So on this drive, it's 3rd and 1 at the Cleveland 6. Denver, they're deep in the red zone. They hand the ball off to Phillip Lindsay, and he's stuffed for no gain. So with that play, it's 4th and 1. So naturally, you've got 4 minutes and 35 seconds to go in the game. This deep in the red zone, your offense, they've moved the ball down the field on the previous 12 plays, on the previous 13 plays. So naturally, you go for the first down or the touchdown, right? Nope. Not these Broncos coached by Vance Joseph. Vance Joseph decides to kick the field goal, and he gets 3 points, and they're still behind, because at this point, before the field goal, Denver was behind 17-13. They kick the field goal, and they're still behind 17-16. Now, in his press conference after the game, he said he wanted to get the points in that situation, and he wanted to depend on the defense to get the stop, which I can kind of understand the thinking behind it, but it's one of those things where it's like, dude, it's wrong place, wrong time in the game to try and do something like that. So Cleveland, they've got the lead 17-16. The defense, they get the stop on 4th and 1, so they do what Vance Joseph asked them to do, and that's when Adam Gotsis, he popped Nick Chubb on that running play. So at this point, it's late inside the game. They're inside 2 minutes. Case Keenum, I like him as a person, but as a quarterback, he doesn't put fear in opposing defenses on a regular basis. He just doesn't. Now, he can win you some games, especially if you put him in the right system, in the right situation. That's one of the things I think that's held Case Keenum back this season, is he's had to learn a completely new offense with completely new receivers. And on top of that, they're asking him to do things that really don't come natural to him with his game. So they've really kind of put the handcuffs on Case Keenum. So I don't know what they're going to do in that situation come 2019, but they need to get an offensive coordinator that can, fit game plans to his strengths. So with Case Keenum, the Broncos, they got the ball on their own 13 with 1:49 to go. Now, another problem that I had with this thinking is Case Keenum had already thrown 2 picks earlier in the game. So I'm like, dude, why don't you just go ahead and try to get the touchdown and get ahead, and then you put all the pressure on Cleveland. So the Broncos, they get the ball back on their own 13-yard line with 1:49 to go. They get the ball to the 50-yard line with 52 seconds left. Now, the problem there was they were moving the ball just fine, but the problem there is that's where they stopped, because the next 3 plays went just like this. Spike to stop the time on the clock, incompletion, sack. And that sack came on when Jabril Peppers, he came in on a cornerback blitz. That play, that sequence ended Denver's season right there. So going back to that decision for Vance Joseph, not going for it on 4th and 1, at that point, it told me everything I needed to know. And then also when I heard the players talk about that play in their press conferences after the game, the players were highly upset with that thinking. So, yeah. that was. Anyway, on that one play, if you go for it, this is why I would have went for it, because on that one play, if you go for it, you get the first and you get at least 3 chances to punch it in and make the Browns have to drive the ball down the field to get the touchdown or at least kick a field goal to tie you. Now that takes time off the clock and it helps your defense because now the pressure's on the Browns offense, because when NFL offensive coordinators and quarterbacks get behind, the first thing they want to do is throw the ball, especially when it's close to the conclusion of the game. That's when you send the dogs on the defense and you let them attack the ball carrier. That's where you put it on your defense. And if you don't get the touchdown, you at least have their offense deep inside their own territory and you take the pressure off the defense and you let the defense bring the pressure. So with all that, man, Vance Joseph, he played not to lose. And I've said this before, in the NFL, when you play not to lose, you lose. This is exactly why I said if Denver even made the playoffs, they wouldn't go very far, because it's not the players that I have an issue with. Denver has plenty of talent on the squad. It's the coaching staff that just seems to not be able to put it all together to get them wins consistently. But you know what? I'm not going to beat a dead Bronco. And yes, that's a play on words. But y'all know my feelings on this coaching staff. I love the Broncos. I truly love the Broncos. But you know what? Let's just move on. It's time for I'm in and I'm out. The Los Angeles Chargers beat the Kansas City Chiefs last Thursday night in a nail-biter that came down to the last 4 seconds in the game when Phillip Rivers hit Mike Williams on an island in the back of the end zone for the 2-point conversion that ultimately put the Chargers ahead and ended the game. The Chargers, they beat the Chiefs 29-28, and with that win, it's got many people wondering, are the Los Angeles Chargers the team to beat in the NFL? And I'm going to say I'm out on that, at least for right now. And I say for right now because even though it appears that the Chargers are peaking and they're getting hot at the right time of the season for a deep postseason run, this is still the Chargers. And if history is any indicator, every time the Chargers get a little hot streak going, they find a way to fall off the rails and derail the train. Now, it's almost like this team is snake-bitten or cursed with not being able to do much in the postseason. And as a Broncos fan, I have absolutely no problem with that. But this year, Anthony Lynn, who actually used to play for the Broncos, he was on their Super Bowl squads back in the late 90s, he's got the Chargers playing their best football right now at the best possible time of the year. The defense, it seems like they're kind of starting to click. Phillip Rivers, he's playing at an MVP caliber level. Mike Williams, he leads that group of underrated wide receivers. He came through at clutch times in that Chiefs game. Melvin Gordon, he's possibly going to return from that knee injury this Saturday against the Ravens. But even if he doesn't, he'll still be good to go come Week 17 when they play Denver in Denver and beyond in the playoffs. Melvin Gordon, he's got 802 yards and 9 touchdowns on the season. And the Chargers, they still managed to beat the squad that many people in the NFL believe to be the best team in the NFL, which I don't believe the Chiefs are the best team. They got a great offense, but their defense is extremely suspect. Now, having said that, I'm not ready to give the Chargers the title of the best team in the NFL either, but I feel very, very comfortable in saying they are the best team in the AFC. Phillip Rivers, he's thrown for almost 4,000 yards, 31 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. He's playing some of the best football of his career. The Chargers' defense is considerably better than the Chiefs' defense. The Chiefs, they're ranked near the bottom of the league in defense, and that's after the return of Eric Berry, which means you can move the ball on Kansas City, which means you have a better chance at keeping Patrick Mahomes and that juggernaut offense on the sidelines. The Chargers, they got Joey Bosa. He's back from that foot injury that sidelined him for a good part of the season. He's got 4 sacks in the 5 games that he's played. Melvin Ingram, he's getting it done on the opposite side. He's got 7 sacks on the season. He just got voted to the Pro Bowl. And the Chiefs, they haven't scored less than 26 points in a game this season. And even though Kareem Hunt is no longer there, the Chiefs can still put up points like it's nobody's business. So, having said all that, this game Saturday night against the Ravens is going to go a long way in telling what kind of team the Los Angeles Chargers are. The Ravens, they come in with the second-ranked defense in the NFL, and they're going to try and put up a wall between Phillip Rivers and the offense in that end zone. So the Chargers, they're the best team in the AFC right now. I have no problem saying that. But as far as the NFL, I'm not ready to go there just yet. As for the best team in the NFL, I still have the New Orleans Saints penciled in right there league-wide, even though they've struggled quite a bit the last 3 games. You know, when they got hit with that wall in Dallas, that really kind of, shook them up. Now, having said that, the thing with New Orleans, even though I feel like they're still the best team in the NFL, for New Orleans to get to the Super Bowl, they are going to have to play at home because New Orleans has shown over the last few weeks, starting with that debacle in Dallas, they've shown that anytime they have to go on the road, they are not the same squad. They struggled at Dallas, and then this past Monday night against Carolina, they really struggled then. But the thing that New Orleans has going for them, they still got that bad brother, Drew Brees, under center. They still got Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, Taysom Hill, and Michael Thomas. Now, that offense, the one weakness that New Orleans has shown on offense is that they have to find another target in the receiving game or in the passing game outside of Michael Thomas, because they've shown that once teams start to really lock on to Michael Thomas and double and triple cover him, New Orleans has shown that they struggle when Michael Thomas can't get separation or can't have a big game. So that's one thing where New Orleans is going to have to get creative with their offense, and they're going to have to find some different ways to get different guys the ball, because if they take that same kind of mentality into the playoffs, even though I feel like they're the best team in the league and they're my Super Bowl pick, if they struggle like they have been the last few weeks, I'm not sure New Orleans is going to get all the way there. This is one of those crazy years in the NFL where right now there's literally no runaway favorite in either conference, and I love it. That's the one thing I love about the NFL. So with the Saints, they've got the number 1 defense against the run, but they got the 29th ranked defense against the pass. So you can't run on them, but you can definitely air it out on them. And if you can air the ball out, especially in today's NFL, with the rules tailored to the offense like they are, you can definitely beat these squads. So one of those crazy years in the NFL, man, and this is why I love the National Football League. It's like a male soap opera, man. You just can't get enough. And every time you turn around and you think you've had enough, you just want more. It's yeah. Man, let's move on. What's the wave with Chef Road Daddy? I've said that This Is Some Bull Jive is my favorite segment just because basically I like saying that word. But this one right here, What's the Wave is near and dear to my heart because, on this podcast, I talk about sports and athletics and, these different teams and everything like that. But one thing about playing sports and being active is you got to be concerned about what you're putting inside your body and how, because what you put inside your body affects everything that goes on outside your body. And this is definitely slowly but surely becoming my favorite segment because this has become a passion of mine over the last few years. So in What's the Wave today, earlier this month, the United States Department of Agriculture announced its final plans to lower nutrition standards for grains, flavored milks, and sodium in school cafeterias. Now, this will affect school cafeterias that were part of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 that former First Lady Michelle Obama heavily advocated. Now, these changes will all go into effect by July, and they apply to school meals that qualify for at least a portion of federal reimbursement. So with these changes, they seem minor on paper, but they can have major long-term consequences, and not the good kind. Now, yes, this is yet another move by the Trump administration to reverse Obama-era policies, but without getting political, what does all this mean? And I'm gonna kind of go through it because there's a lot to unpack with this ruling. So, having said that, let's start with the grains. Under the Obama-era rules, schools were required to serve entirely whole grain-rich foods, which means that whether it was pizza dough, pasta, hamburger buns, etc., they had to contain at least 50% whole grains. Well, under the new rules, only half of the grain products on the cafeteria's menu must be whole grain rich. So, to get technical, if a school really wanted to, they could serve a whole grain rich food 2 or 3 days out of the week, and they could serve refined grain food the other 2 or 3 days. Well, we all know that refined foods are not as nutritious as their whole or their natural counterparts, so that automatically makes school lunches less nutritious just with that right there. Now, under the Obama administration, schools have been able to request exemptions from the rules if they could prove financial hardship, and according to the Obama administration, the most popular requests were for regional staple foods like grits in the South or tortillas in the Southwest. And depending on what research you look at, the South is one of the more unhealthy parts of the country. And in my opinion, that's not a coincidence, because when you start talking about regional, when you start breaking things down by the region, you have to dive deeper into other factors when breaking it down like that, because you can draw correlations by income, geography, socioeconomic status, and all that. But to be honest with you, that's a deep, deep conversation that I do not have time for on this episode. Now, the Trump administration says the exemptions process wasn't sustainable, and some schools found it to be too burdensome. Now, I'm not sure I believe that, because when you look at it from another aspect of the exemption process, it's hard for a lot of kids to even distinguish when foods like tortillas, grits, or pasta are made with whole grains. And the reason why I say this is because this isn't your grandparents' or your parents' healthier food choices anymore, where, back then eating healthier was like eating a hockey puck or a rock, and the food tasted like cardboard. It had no texture, no flavor. It just tasted like trash. But when you fast forward to today, healthier foods today, they taste better, they're made better, and a lot of times they're actually cheaper than they used to be. Now, that's not always the case, but when you really look and you really do some research, there's a lot of healthier food choices, like whole food choices, that are healthier and they're cheaper than a lot of the conventional junk food or the fast food choices that we tend to navigate to. And on top of that, do we really need more foods who are lacking in nutrition in our school cafeterias? Do we really need more less nutritious food in our school cafeterias? Not at all. Then we take it to the milk, which milk is an interesting one because there are so many different types of milk nowadays. Now, I'm not an old man by any stretch of the imagination, but it used to be, man, when you went to the store, when it came to milk, you just had low fat, no fat, whole, 2%, 1%, chocolate, or strawberry. Now, man, there's lactose-free, almond milk, cashew milk, coconut milk, cold-pressed milk, organic milk, and the list goes on and on. Now, as for milk served in schools, though, the Trump administration, they will allow schools to serve low-fat flavored milks, which is a terrible idea, instead of only the non-fat version. And why exactly are they doing this? Well, according to Sonny Perdue, who's the agriculture secretary, kids told him that the non-fat flavored milk did not taste as good as they would have liked. Gee, I wonder why. Because flavored milk, especially the whole milk or low-fat versions, are full of sugar. And when you break this whole thing down, sugar is the main culprit in a lot of our problems with obesity and people being overweight and diabetes and all that other. Man, sugar is the main culprit. Sugar and high fructose corn syrup, because high fructose corn syrup is just basically another version of sugar, because your body breaks it down just like it's sugar, and it has the same effects on your body. And if your body's like mine, it doesn't get rid of sugar it doesn't like to get rid of sugar, it likes to hold on to it. So yeah, that can become a problem. And when you're giving kids these kinds of flavored dairy milks, which is the milk that's in our school cafeterias, you might as well be giving them a can of soda. Your average non-fat chocolate milk can contain up to 20 grams of sugar in 1 cup. The low-fat version can contain up to 25 grams. Whole chocolate milk can contain up to 28 grams of sugar. And this isn't even taking into account calories and carbs and stuff like that when you talk about milk. And for comparison, 1 8-ounce can of Coca-Cola has 28 grams of sugar in it. The 12-ounce version has 39 grams of sugar. This is a big reason why the Obamas were such big proponents of kids consuming more non-flavored milk. I mean, people tried to turn it into this, oh, they're trying to make us socialists and things like that. No, they're telling us, hey, there's too much sugar content in these kids' food. This rollback is alarming also, and it's also highly questionable because, to be honest, childhood obesity is on the rise in the United States, and we have got to get a handle on this or our kids are in serious trouble in the future. Check these stats from the Center for Disease Control out. This concerns children and adolescents ages 2 to 19. 13.9% of kids among 2 to 5-year-olds are obese. That number jumps to 18.4% among kids 6 to 11 years old. It jumps even higher to 20.6% among 12 to 19 years old. These numbers are high also when you break down some of the different demographics among kids. 25.8% of Hispanic children are obese. 22% of non-Hispanic black children are obese. And non-Hispanic whites at a 14.1% rate. These are all stats from the CDC. These numbers didn't come from me. Now, there's something to be said about obesity and socioeconomic status, but again, that's a deeper conversation than I have time for. But why is all of this important? Because many of the habits that we form as kids carry over into our adult lives. So when you have kids who are growing up eating unhealthy food, they carry that lifestyle into their adulthood. And when you get into adulthood, you start dealing with, not obesity, you start dealing with issues with the different issues tied to obesity and high blood sugar. You got the blood pressures and diabetes, and then you have the complications from these issues. With diabetes, if you're not careful with it and you don't manage it right, you start losing limbs, and after a while, diabetes basically eats your body away. And we're starting to see even kids come down with diabetes. Just like how parents raise their kids to be respectful and act a certain way, that kid is more likely to grow up with that mindset and follow those guidelines and treat people accordingly. On the flip side, if the parents didn't raise a child with structure and how to carry themselves with certain manners and how to talk to people a certain way, there's a really good chance that kid is going to grow up and be a reckless adult. And we've seen all too often that if the parents don't raise a child, society and the world gladly will, and you don't want that. Well, it's the same thing with our eating and our exercise habits. If a child is raised on a well-balanced diet where it's 90% good stuff, 10% treats, or even 80% good stuff and 20% treats, or something along those lines, if they're raised on a good eating regimen, they're more than likely going to continue that as their life goes on. And you're probably asking, why? Well, simply because kids need consistency. If a kid grows up being active and participating in sports or physical education programs, they're more than likely going to continue that lifestyle or those habits as they get older. Now, all of this is not parents' fault. All of this is not parents intentionally feeding their kids junk food. Some of it is simply educational. Some parents simply don't realize the ingredients and the sugar content in these foods. And this is a huge one because when it comes to these foods and the ingredients in them, we have to pay attention to the labels. Don't get caught up. You know, a lot of times when it comes to these labels and things like that, these food companies and these marketing companies, they put stuff like on that when you see, oh, it's got 10 grams of protein per serving and, you know, it's low calorie or low fat or non-fat, this and that and the other. But what they're not telling you is, even though it may be low fat, they're putting artificial sweeteners in there and other empty calories in there to make the food have some kind of taste. Especially like if you go and you get like these protein bars, I see like these protein bars that say they have like 25 grams of protein in it, but then when you look at the label, it might have 25 grams of protein in it, but then when you look at the carbohydrate content, it's got like 40. And then when you look at the calorie count, you know, that one bar may account for like 140, 150 calories. So it's not just about getting caught up on protein content and things like that. You got to look at the whole circle. You have to look at the carbohydrate content, the calories, the protein content, the sugar content. There's all these different aspects to food and these labels. So the main thing that I look for when it comes to food and these food labels, look for the sugar content, look for the calorie count, look for the grams of carbohydrates, look for, and as far as the ingredients goes, especially you want to cut out high fructose corn syrup because, again, high fructose corn syrup is simply sugar. It's just in a different form. Your body's going to treat it as sugar. So that's the kind of things you want to look for. Don't get caught up in these marketing gimmicks because these companies, they're all about making money. And if they can slap a sticker or slap a label on there that's, real sexy looking and it's going to catch your eye, and, they know a lot of people don't know any better, that's where they're going to get you. So pay attention to that. Also, with parents and kids, we know kids love breakfast cereal. And breakfast cereal is a great example here because most breakfast cereals are covered in sugar. And that's part of the problem with a lot of our kids being, overweight and things like that, or a lot of our kids developing bad eating habits. A lot of these breakfast cereals are covered in sugar, and that's why a lot of them taste so good. So I don't eat a lot of breakfast cereal, and when I do eat breakfast cereal, I generally tend to stick to something like Grape Nuts, or Raisin Bran is a really good one. Raisin Bran with very, very little sugar, or if you want, you can sweeten it with cinnamon. Some people sweeten it with honey. But Raisin Bran is a good one because it doesn't have all that sugar. Cornflakes, the regular cornflakes, are really good ones. Cheerios, that whole Cheerios line is a really good pick, especially the Honey Nut Cheerios, because Honey Nut Cheerios, they got that little kick of honey in them, and it just you don't have to add any sugar or anything to it for them to taste good. So those are really, really good cereals. If you're going to eat breakfast cereal, those are really good choices when it comes. And you have a lot of granola cereals and things like that, but you got to watch that too, because some of these cereals that have a lot of grains and granola in them, they also have sugars and things like that put on them for flavor. So pay attention to that when it comes to breakfast cereal. So with all that being said, what can parents do to try to, combat this problem? Well, most dietitians and nutritionists suggest giving your kids 5 servings of fruit and vegetables a day, less processed foods like Lunchables and Hot Pockets and things like that, and cooking more meals at home. Now, that last tip is going to be a big problem for a lot of parents and household because parents already have a lot of stuff on their plate just in their adult life. Then you have the kids and things like that you have to deal with. So for that one, it's going to kind of depend on what your household flow is like. But basically what they're saying is if you can cook more food at home, that's the best route to go. And then I guess on the next podcast, I can kind of give tips about, if you don't have a lot of time to cook, kind of go in depth about some fast food options that won't kill your waistline. Also, when it comes to the household flow, they suggest cutting the TV and mobile device consumption down to no more than 2 hours a day and encourage your kids to play sports or other physical education activities. And I can attest to that one because when I was young, my parents didn't let me watch a lot of TV. They always had me reading. I was always in sports. I played piano. I was always in something. So like my mom used to always say, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So if you can keep a kid busy, that's the best way to go. So and with as far as the exercise part goes, if kids just get 45 minutes to an hour of some kind of physical activity every day, that will do wonders for their health. And the same goes for adults. Or if adults can get 45 minutes to an hour of physical activity anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week, wherever you can fit it in, that'll do wonders for your health. And as far as parents and kids go, I understand many parents have picky eaters. So how do you work around that? You can give them options, broccoli or green beans, peas or mixed vegetables. Well, mixed vegetables have peas. When it comes to fruit, you can give them, let them pick their choice. Apple, orange, mango, strawberry. It's so many different types of fruit. They're going to have a hard time getting bored when it comes to that. So, just giving them options and things like that. We know kids love options. So you kind of just have to limit their options a little bit, but do give them a choice when it comes to things like that. And this last tip that they give is huge. This is the biggest one. Parents, let your kids see you eating better. Lead by example, because we all know, now I'm not a parent, but I've been around enough kids that we all know that kids mimic a lot of what they see and hear. And if they see you putting good things in your body and getting some exercise in, they're more than likely going to want to do the same because kids love to mimic what they see and hear. So when it comes down to this, man, we can beat this problem, y'all. It's going to take a little bit of work. Well, it's going to take a lot of work. We can beat this. It's just going to take a lot of work, a lot of research, and it's just, these companies ain't going to do it for us. We have to take our health seriously, and we have to do it for ourselves. And it's going to take some time. It's going to take years, decades even. But we can turn this problem around, and we can beat this. We just got to put our minds to it. In this last segment, this is some bull jive. The Pro Bowl roster was announced earlier this week, and there were a few names on there of guys who had Pro Bowl caliber seasons, but they didn't make the cut. Guys like defensive tackle Chris Jones of the Chiefs, who had 14 sacks on the season, but he was left out in place of AFC West rival Melvin Ingram of the Chargers, who has 7 sacks, or Colts quarterback Andrew Luck, who had 34 touchdowns and 13 interceptions on the year with 3,951 yards. For comparison, Tom Brady, who just got voted to his 14th Pro Bowl, has 3,979 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. One of the names that really jumped out at me as far as the snubs was Alvin Kamara of the Saints. Because how did this dude not make the Pro Bowl? He's one of the biggest parts of one of the best offenses in the league. That Saints offense simply isn't the same without 41 in the game, doing what he does best. He made the 2017 Pro Bowl as a rookie, and he followed that up with an even better season this year. So far, Kamara has 860 rush yards, 627 receiving yards, and 16 touchdowns. How'd this dude not make the Pro Bowl? Well, in the NFC, they're stacked at the running back positions because you have Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, and Ezekiel Elliott all in front of him. So when you have MVP caliber guys like that in front of you, it can be kind of hard to crack the list. Then you can take it even further. There's some other cats that didn't make it. One name that really jumped off of the list to me was Darius Leonard of the Colts. He's their rookie middle linebacker, and he leads the league in tackles with 146. That's 22 more than the next man on the list in Luke Kuechly of the Carolina Panthers. But when you have big-name cats like him and Bobby Wagner up in Seattle in front of you, it can be kind of hard to make the list. But you know what? When it comes to Alvin Kamara, it doesn't really matter if he made the list at the end of the day or not, because if you ask me, he won't have time to go to the Pro Bowl because he'll be too busy preparing to go to the Super Bowl. But still, Alvin Kamara, Darius Leonard, Chris Jones, Russell Wilson, and some of these other cats not being in the Pro Bowl, that's some bull jive. Well, that's my time for this episode of the Undrafted Podcast. I want to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for blessing me with the gifts, the talents, the resources to do this podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to tune in and hang out with me on this podcast. Don't forget, you can follow the Undrafted Podcast on Instagram at the Undrafted Podcast or on Twitter at RoForShowPro. And I'm going to leave you with a Bible verse today, Psalm 34:1. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. And remember, do your best and let God handle the rest. Be blessed.